What's going on, everyone? Sam Factor, founder, CEO, and content creator at WalterPicks, back for another video. This time I'm breaking down how to win in the Sleeper Daily Draft game. This is my favorite daily fantasy game that you can play. Reminder, as always, if you use code WALTER when you sign up and you deposit for the first time on Sleeper, your deposit will be matched 100% up to the first $100. So you deposit $100, you will get $200 to play with in this game. And I'm going to be breaking down how you can win in the Sleeper Daily Draft game. This is the best DFS game out there, in my opinion, and it's brand new. So there is a lot of opportunity to win while people are still learning how to play the Sleeper Daily Draft game. So let me just quickly overview first how the Sleeper Daily Draft game works. What are the rules? What's the roster settings? How does it work? Then I'll get into the specific strategies I'll be using this year to win in this game. Okay, so first of all, let's run through the scoring settings because this is really important to understand. The scoring settings in this game where you're going to be filling out. First, let me actually just show you an example team of what a final team can look like. So here's one of the teams I just drafted just a few minutes ago. So you start 1 quarterback, 2 running backs, 4 wide receivers, and 1 tight end. You're drafting against 7 other people. So it's an 8-person draft. Okay, going back to the settings really quickly. Passing touchdowns count for 4 points. Passing yards count for 0.04 points. Rushing yards count for 0.1. which is pretty standard. Receiving, point per reception in this format, 1 point per reception. This is really, really important to understand and to know, and this will dictate specific players you want to target in this game. There is -2 points for a fumble, receiving touchdowns and rushing touchdowns. Those both count for 6 points, but passing touchdowns are 4 points. So some quick takeaways when looking at this scoring settings. First of all, rushing yards count for about 250% more points than passing yards. Takeaway, target rushing quarterbacks. We'll get there in a second. And also, the rushing touchdowns, they count for about 150% more points than the passing touchdowns. Again, takeaway there is target rushing quarterbacks. 6 points for rushing touchdown, 4 points for passing touchdown. And then finally, again, just to call out, this is really important, 1 point per reception. You want players that catch passes at every position, running back, receiver, and tight end. And then I guess last small thing to call out here, interceptions don't really matter that much. Only -1 point for interceptions. I've seen leagues that are as high as -3, -4. Don't worry or factor in interceptions too much to your analysis in this game. All right, now that we all know the basic rules and settings and roster construction in this format, let's dive into how we can win consistently in the Sleeper Daily Draft game. One final thing to call out before we dive into it is actually the mechanics of the cost to play this game, which is really important to understand. And this is part of the reason the Sleeper Daily Draft game is my favorite DFS game out there. There's an extremely low barrier of entry for everyone to play. You can only draft for $1. There's no option to draft for more than $1 or less than $1. To do a draft, it is an entry fee of $1. And in that 8-team league, there's going to be payouts. So let me pull this up. So you're drafting in an 8-person league. So it costs $1 to do a draft. And then in that 8-person league that you're drafting in, first place gets $4, second place gets $2, and third place gets $1. So there's a total of $7 paid out when there's a total of $8 entered in. This means there's a rake of about 12.5%. So Sleeper's taking about 12.5% of the entry fees for hosting these leagues, which is about standard in what you see in other DFS platforms. Usually it's around 10 to 15% rake. But this is where it gets really interesting. After you enter your draft for just $1 and you're competing in that 8-person league, if you like how your draft went, so after your draft, you can decide to put more money onto that team in head-to-head contests or tournaments. So you can see it's a little bit blurred out here, and I'll show you in a second what it looks like after we do a draft. I'll do a draft on this video. But you can enter $5 head-to-head contests, $10 head-to-head contests, $25, $50, $100 head-to-head contests, and you can do all those same amounts in tournaments as well. So that's entering your team into additional 8-team leagues. So as it usually works, in head-to-head contests, one person wins, and the platform takes a small rake. So in the head-to-head contest, Sleeper's taking a 10% rake. So 2 people are going to put up $5 on their teams, and Sleeper's going to take $1 out of the pot, and then the winner's going to get $9. So $10 was entered, $9 is paid out. Another thing that's important to call out here is your head-to-head matchup is going to be likely against someone that wasn't in the same 8-person draft as you. So you will be playing sometimes some of the same players that are on your team. This is the same as how it works on other DFS platforms like DraftKings and FanDuel, but it is important to understand that you're not necessarily going to be playing head-to-head matchups against the teams that you draft against. Okay, now that we understand the mechanics of how this works, what the settings are, and how much it costs to enter, and then what you can do after your draft if you really like your team in head-to-head contests or tournament contests. Now let's get into the fun part of the actual strategy to win consistently in the Sleeper Daily Draft game. Now I'm going to be focusing most of my strategy and analysis here on the head-to-head contest, which is almost entirely what I will be playing. I will give some strategy for the tournament contest, but the strategy does differ depending on if you're going to enter your team after your draft into head-to-head contests or tournament contests. My very first piece of advice when playing this game is to do a few drafts before you scaling up spend on this game to get a sense of the average draft position and where players are going in a given week. Here's an example of a draft that I just did recently. You can see in this draft, Justin Fields went in the 3rd round. But if I go to a different draft that I did recently, check out where Justin Fields went in this draft. He went in the 6th round. If you do a few drafts, you'll get a sense of the range of where some guys are going, and that will help you get value on the teams that you actually scale and put money on after the draft. My other piece of advice for this game, and definitely as you go through those first few drafts and get a sense of ADP, is to make a list of players you want to target at each position and around what rounds you want to target them at before scaling up your spend. You want this list to be narrow into a small pool of players that you really like, and we're going to outline the strategy of how to come up with that list of players. And also, I'll be live every single week on this YouTube channel, sharing you with my list of the guys that I will be targeting in this game. But you want the list to be narrow enough that you're really honing in on the best value players each week, but wide enough that you can adapt and be flexible based on the given draft and get really good players no matter what. Okay, so now digging into the strategy a little bit deeper, and this is where the head-to-head strategy differs a little bit from the tournament strategy. In head-to-head contests, we really want players with a very high floor. We just need to beat one team. We do not want busts in our lineup. Ideally, in head-to-head contests, we get players with a high floor and a high ceiling, but in tournaments, all that really matters is the high ceiling. You really want a chance to get that first place prize money, and you need your team to have a chance to get first, second, or third out of 8 teams. So you want to focus on ceiling, and in tournaments especially, you really want to be getting a high upside QB wide receiver stack or QB tight end stack. Okay, basically the rest of this video, I'm going to be specifically talking to head-to-head contests. Some of the strategy will also apply to tournament contests, but again, I'll be playing almost entirely head-to-head contests this year, so that's where my strategy focus has been. So key point number 1 in terms of tight ends you want to target. You want to draft tight ends that have tight end number 1 overall upside each week. This is a very short list of tight ends. Heading into week 1, I would put Travis Kelce on this list, Mark Andrews on this list, and TJ Hawkinson on this list, and maybe Darren Waller as well. That's only 4 tight ends. So you really want to prioritize getting one of those 4 tight ends in your head-to-head lineups each week. And if you don't get a tight end with number 1 overall upside, one of those 4 tight ends we mentioned, you should be waiting till the second to last or last round to draft your tight end. Okay, moving on to quarterback strategy now. Do not reach for quarterbacks in these drafts. Remember, this is an 8-person draft. There is going to be high floor and high upside quarterbacks available late in these drafts with good matchups and or rushing upside. You can see in this draft, I got Justin Herbert in the 6th round against the Dolphins in week 1. He projects as a top 6 quarterback in our projections. He's playing in one of the highest projected scoring matchups of the week. Another interesting thing to call out in this draft specifically, you can see that I already knew the teams to the right of me in this draft had already taken quarterbacks. Lamar Jackson went in the 1st round, Jalen Hurts went in the 2nd round, and Justin Fields went in the 3rd round. You are not allowed to draft a second quarterback in this contest. So you can see in the 5th round, I decided to take DK Metcalf. I actually wanted Justin Herbert, but then I looked at the other teams and I knew it was impossible for one of those teams to draft a quarterback. So I waited one more round. This often happens at the quarterback position and the tight end position because you can't draft multiple quarterbacks and tight ends. Technically, you can draft multiple tight ends, but you would never want to do that. The final thing about the quarterback position, and I alluded to this earlier, I actually think the numbers I said might have been slightly off, but you want to target rushing quarterbacks in this format. Rushing quarterbacks are overpowered based on these scoring settings. Rushing touchdowns are worth 50% more than passing touchdowns, and rushing yards are worth 150% more than passing yards. Those numbers are accurate. I think I said 250% before. It's 150% more points per rushing yard than a passing yard. So this means we want to target guys like Jalen Hurts, Lamar Jackson, Justin Fields, Anthony Richardson, and Josh Allen. You can see in this draft, I took Anthony Richardson in the 8th round. I really like him for this week 1 contest because he's playing the Jaguars in a dome. He's a 5-point underdog. There's no Jonathan Taylor playing in the first 4 weeks. I think Anthony Richardson could lead all quarterbacks in rushing yards through the first month of the season, and I really like this game environment for him. I'm going to be playing a lot of Anthony Richardson if he is running as much as I expect in these head-to-head contests. Moving on to the running back position, which is a really pivotal position in this game. You want to target running backs with a path to 20 plus touches or at least 5 targets. Either of those things are great. If you can get a running back that projects for 20 plus touches and 5 plus targets, that is the ideal running back for this format. Remember, this is a PPR format, so we want running backs that catch passes. In general, target receiving backs in negative game scripts. An example of this in week 1 would be Rachaad White with the Bucks' big underdogs against the Vikings. We know Rachaad White's going to catch a lot of passes this season, but you also want to target back rushing running backs in positive game scripts. The ideal example of this one in week 1 is J.K. Dobbins, who's a massive favorite on the Ravens against the Texans. The final note I have about the running backs is, remember, in this format, you start 2 running backs, 2 wide receivers, and you have 2 flex slots. In head-to-head contests, ideally, you're playing running backs in those flex slots. And this is something I get carried away with a little bit and struggle to do all the time because I sometimes really like the receivers I'm seeing in the later rounds of these drafts. But running backs generally have a higher floor than wide receivers because their touches are more locked in. So if you can target receiving backs in negative game scripts or running backs in positive game scripts projected to get 20 plus touches, those are the ideal players for your flex slot to maximize your floor and ceiling in head-to-head contests. You can see in this draft here, I drafted Christian McCaffrey, Nick Chubb, and Jahmyr Gibbs with my first 3 picks, and then I ran it back with David Montgomery as my last pick. So I'm starting 2 running backs and then an additional 2 running backs in my flex slots here. All 4 of these running backs should see reasonable target volume in week 1. McCaffrey and Gibbs, they should clear that 5+ target mark. And I think Nick Chubb and David Montgomery are low-key going to have a bigger receiving role than people expect. And I filled in my receiver spots with 2 guys that I think have an extremely high ceiling and a higher floor than most people think, with DK Metcalf and Mike Williams. My final thought here about the positions to target as you make your list of players you want to target in this contest each week. As we get more and more data throughout the season, you want to chase targets in air yards at the wide receiver and tight end positions. The tight ends, the top 3 tight ends in air yards last season, Travis Kelce, Mark Andrews, and TJ Hawkinson. I almost want one of those 3 guys, and maybe Darren Waller will be in the conversation this year. But again, just saying, you really need tight ends with tight end 1 overall upside and the data to look at to find those guys. Targets, air yards. And the same thing goes for receivers. Both DK Metcalf and Mike Williams, who I took in this draft, should be really high in the air yards category this year. As a reminder, air yard is the total distance the ball traveled before getting to the receiver. It is a better volume metric than targets because it's a more descriptive volume metric than targets. If you get 10 targets at the line of scrimmage, those are not as valuable as 10 targets 30 yards down the field. And that's what air yards helps to tell us. Air yards is one of the most important features in the machine learning model that goes into Walter, which has had the best fantasy projections in the industry for quite some time and what powers the WalterPicks app. All right, we're close to wrapping up here, but I have one more really, really important final strategy tip before closing this out. And that has to do with your bankroll strategy. Your bankroll strategy is your strategy about how much you should be risking each week in this game. And this might seem like an annoying thing to think about or something you don't want to sink time into, but I cannot emphasize this enough. Bankroll strategy. How much are you going to risk each week on this game? So I recommend coming up with a number before you start playing this game. How much over the course of the season are you willing to risk on this game? Is that $100? Is that $10? Is that $500? Is that $5,000? For me, starting the season, my bankroll is $5,000. I'm going to go through an example of if your bankroll is $1,000 because the numbers are just a little bit easier. So let's say you go into the season and you start your bankroll at $1,000. That means over the course of the season, if you stick to your bankroll strategies that I'm about to outline, you cannot lose more than $1,000. But I want to highlight that doesn't mean it doesn't cap how much you can make. As long as you have good strategy and you're winning, there's really no cap on how much you can make. Having a smaller bankroll limits the upside just a little bit, but ultimately what a bankroll strategy does is really limits your downside. It's the maximum you can lose playing this game, and really it's almost impossible to lose actually that much if you follow these strategies each week because your bankroll resets each week depending on how much you win and lose in the previous week. Okay, that's how bankroll works. So let's say you have a bankroll of $1,000 for this game over the course of the season. My general rule of thumb is you don't want to risk more than 10% of your bankroll in a given week. So if you have $1,000 bankroll to start the season, then week 1, you should not be risking more than $100 across all daily draft contests in week 1. The second thing is you shouldn't risk more than 3% of your entire bankroll on any given team. And this, I got to be honest with you, is one of the hardest things in this specific game. I still struggle with this a little bit, but remember, this football is a high variance game. So fantasy football is an extremely high variance game. Injuries happen all the time. Unexpected things happen all the time. Underdogs beats favorites. Favorites lose to underdogs. Things go wrong in football and fantasy football. You're not going to be right 100% of the time. This is why this bankroll strategy is so important. So don't risk more than 3% of your total bankroll on any given team. One of the really interesting things about this game, right, is you're deciding how much to risk really after your draft. So sometimes you can get really excited about a specific team. Like you really got all the players you wanted in your daily draft. You do not think you're going to get a better team than this in a given week. You still should not risk more than 3% of your total bankroll. So if your bankroll is $1,000, then you shouldn't risk more than $30. So again, just to recap the bankroll strategy, first of all, set what your bankroll is going to be before the season. How much are you willing to risk and just start out with as a bankroll? Second, don't risk more than 10% of your bankroll in a given week. And third, don't risk more than 3% of your bankroll on a given team. Okay, so before we dive into it, I want to outline exactly how this game works. So first of all, you're going to go to Sleeper. You're going to find the daily draft game within Sleeper. For me, that daily draft game is right at the top here of all my leagues. I'm going to hit play. I'm going to hit play, and I'm going to hit next, and I'm going to confirm for $1. So first of all, just to call out here, this is an 8-person draft. First place gets $4, second place gets $2, third place gets $1, a total payout of $7. So $8 is entered and $7 is paid out, which means there's about a 12.5% rake. That's how much Sleeper is taking. Sleeper's taking $1 from the pot for hosting this draft. This is not a tiny rake, but it's also not massive in the grand scheme of the DFS landscape. And if we can be winning players in this game, we can win more than what they're taking in this rake. So it's going to be an 8-person draft. We're about to see what it looks like once I get in here. But just to call out the scoring settings really quick, passing yards are 0.04 points, or 1 point for every 25 passing yards, and there's 1 point for every 10 rushing and receiving yards. So rushing yards count for 150% more points than passing yards. Target rushing quarterbacks. Passing touchdowns are 4 points. Rushing touchdowns are 6 points. So rushing touchdowns are 50% higher points than passing touchdowns. Again, target rushing quarterbacks. The last takeaway here, this is points per reception. 1 point per reception. Target receiving running backs, and generally wide receivers and tight ends getting a lot of targets and receptions. All right, let's enter this draft so you can see exactly how this works. So first of all, it's interesting in this game. Sometimes there will not be only people that you're drafting against. Sometimes the drafts don't fill entirely. There's drafts starting every 5 minutes. So sometimes, the lobby will not fill. In this draft, you can see I got the 7th pick, and there's only 2 other people in this draft. The rest of the teams will be drafted by bots. And this is really interesting because sometimes the bots are really, really bad at drafting and not adapting to some news and injury news going on over the course of the season, and sometimes can be exploited. Okay, so I'm on the clock. Christian McCaffrey just fell to me at 7 overall. I'm going to take him. I want running backs that catch passes and have a path to 20-plus touches in general. Christian McCaffrey absolutely checks that box. I generally also, since I'm playing in head-to-head contests, I want running backs in my flex spots because I think they have a higher floor and ceiling because their touches are generally more locked in, especially the receiving backs. They're not really game script dependent. Okay, back on the clock. And I'm going to go with another running back here with Saquon Barkley. So I'm starting with 2 receiving backs. Again, I want running backs that catch passes. Saquon, McCaffrey absolutely check those boxes. I considered Tony Pollard there, but decided against it. And you can see that these drafts go really fast, especially when they're not full because the bots draft for you. All right, I'm back on the clock here, and I'm actually going to go with Mark Andrews. I really want one of these 4 tight ends in almost every draft right now. Travis Kelce, Mark Andrews, TJ Hawkinson, or Darren Waller, but especially those top 3. I'm interested to see how Waller's role looks in week 1, but I don't really love stacking a tight end with a running back. And I already took Saquon Barkley, so that kind of removes Darren Waller from my consideration. And I'm going to take Jahmyr Gibbs as my 3rd receiving back. I actually think these are 2 of the we have 2 of the 3 running backs projected for the most targets this season in Walter's projections. McCaffrey and Jahmyr Gibbs. Eckler, I think, is in the top 3 as well, and Saquon is for sure in the top 5. These are the exact type of running backs I want to be targeting in PPR formats, and I'm confident I'm going to see some really good receivers here still to fill out my receiver slots. And I'm deciding between Olave and Mike Williams here. The quarterbacks too. Yeah, I'm going to go Mike Williams. So I take Mike Williams with my first receiver slot. and you can fast forward, editors, you can fast forward through this a little bit. So I take Mike Williams as my first receiver. Really like his upside and floor against the Dolphins in week 1. That's one of the higher projected scoring games. He's going to be playing in the slot more. I think he's seen as this boom bust guy. I think he's going to be a lot of boom and not too much bust this season. I'm going to go Amari Cooper as my second receiver here. And now I just need a quarterback and then one flex player. I'll be looking at running backs and receivers for that flex spot, depending on who's there. We'll see which direction I go. Rashad White, Alexander Madison do fit the list of guys that I'm willing to target in this format. Both are still there. We'll see if they're still there at my next pick. And then a quarterback, I'm going to be taking Anthony Richardson. All right, I'm back on the clock here. Rashad White is there against the Vikings. And yeah, I'm gonna stick to what the strategy I outlined in this video, targeting running backs for that flex spot, running backs that catch passes. And Rashad White is a running back that catches passes, and he's in a negative projected game script against the Vikings, as Buccaneers are, I think, at least 5-point underdogs in that game. And that game's in a dome in Minnesota. I really like targeting those dome environments too for the pass catchers. And finally, for my last pick, a guy that I think I'm probably going to be taking a lot in this contest, and this might feel high risk and head-to-head in week 1. I really don't think it is. We have him projected as QB6 in week 1 against the Jaguars. He's a 5-point underdog. No Jonathan Taylor. I think Anthony Richardson could lead all quarterbacks in rushing yards in week 1. Okay, so my team is set. Here's the team that I just drafted. Anthony Richardson at QB. He was my last pick. I got Christian McCaffrey, Saquon Barkley, Mike Williams, Amari Cooper, Mark Andrews, Jahmyr Gibbs, Rashad White. I believe I followed all of the strategies I outlined in this video. So now after the draft, here's how it works. So I risked $1 on this draft. And if I come in first, second, or third, I will either make my money back or make money in this 8-person league that I just drafted in. And because there was bots in this league, they will fill the rest of the league with other drafts. So there might be people within your league too, if the draft isn't full, with the similar, some of the same players as you. Again, this doesn't differ that much from other DFS contests, unlike DraftKings and FanDuel. So there'll be 5 teams entered into this contest that did a draft separately from this one, but that also didn't fill. They'll put us together in an 8-person league. But this is where it gets really interesting. After the draft, you can now risk more. You can now risk more on this team if you like how your team turned out. And I really do like how this team turned out. So I am going to risk a little bit more on this team following my bankroll strategy. I can't risk more than $150 on this team. That would be more than 3% of my entire bankroll heading into the season. I don't feel super strongly about risking that much anyways on this team. So I'll probably do 3 to 5 $5 head-to-head contests. I usually stick to $5 head-to-heads. We'll see how high my bankroll scales this year, and maybe I'll go a little bit above that. But after the draft, you can decide to enter your team into more contests. Head-to-head contest, that means you're playing against one other team. One interesting thing to call out here is in the head-to-head contest, there's a 10% rake. So both people in this $5 contest I'm about to enter, both people are going to risk $5. So there's a $10 total entered. There's $10 total entered, and then $9 total paid out. So 10%, $1 of that 10 is taken from Sleeper. In the tournaments, though, I believe this rake is actually higher. We can calculate this really quickly. There is $35 paid out. So first gets $20, second gets $10, third gets $5 if you enter into a $5 tournament. So that means $5 out of the $40 that's entered, right? 8 teams entered $5. That's $40 total entered. And there's only $35 paid out. So $5 of what was entered is taken from Sleeper. That is actually 12.5% rake. So the rake is higher in the tournaments. I'll be sticking to the head-to-heads for my own personal mental health reasons, and head-to-heads is just generally much safer floor of how much you can lose. Like kind of worst case scenario in head-to-head contests, if you're doing enough of them, you're not going to lose more than like 30% of them if you follow the strategies I outlined in this video. And really, if you follow the strategies in this video, you're likely going to win much more than 55%, 57% of them that you need to win to beat and make more than the rate that Sleeper is taken. Last year, I was winning at right around a 60% rate. And with my learnings and lessons from last year, I'm hoping to hit at a higher rate than that this year. So after the draft, you can enter $5 head-to-heads, $10 head-to-heads, $25 head-to-heads, $50, $100, $500, up to $1,000 head-to-head contests. I don't plan on doing those unless my bankroll really gets really, really high. I generally am going to be sticking to $5 head-to-heads, but you also can enter in tournaments. And in tournaments, you're entered into an 8-person contest and you need to come in first, second, or third. And in the tournaments, you really want to maximize the upside of your roster so you have a chance at that first place payout. In the head-to-heads, you really want to increase the floor. You want to focus on the floor of your team. You still want an upside in the head-to-head contests, but the floor is really important. You can't get 0 points. You can't get 0-point weeks in the head-to-head contests. That will be absolutely killer. You need players that will not bust in your head-to-head lineups. Okay, that is how the daily draft game works. There you have it, guys. That's how the Sleeper Daily Draft game works and some strategies that are going to help you win this season. Make sure you hit that like and subscribe button so you don't miss more daily draft content this season, as well as more fantasy football content coming all season long. Reminder, if you're playing the Sleeper Daily Draft game and you haven't deposited on Sleeper before, use code Walter when you sign up and you will get a $100 up to a $100 deposit match on Sleeper. So if you deposit $100, you will get $200 to play with in Sleeper, an unreal promo that you can get if you use code Walter. Thanks so much for tuning in, guys. Time is the most valuable thing we have, so thank you so much for spending some time with me today. I'll be back super soon, and I will be doing weekly daily draft live streaming a few of the drafts that I do each week to share my tips and strategies each week as the season goes on.